r/nosleep. Posted by you/nslewis. My wife has a removable face. I've never glimpsed what lies beneath it, but my best friend has. Samantha told me about it on our third date. We were watching a movie on her couch when I made my move to kiss her. She whipped her hand in front of my face and blocked me. "There's something you need to know," she said. I braced myself. Here it comes. I'm not ready for a relationship. Nothing to do with you, of course. It was the absolute last thing that I wanted to hear, because I was already crazy about her. "Okay," I said. "I have a removable face." "That's a new one." "You have a what now?" I was about to laugh, but she was wearing a deadly serious expression. "I have a removable face." "Is that, like, a metaphor or something?" "No. My face is literally removable. Look closely." She lifted her chin and traced her jawline with a finger. "You can see the seam." After admiring how beautiful her neck was for a dizzying moment, I leaned in for an inspection. It was very hard to see, but it did look like there was a slightly unnatural transition there from her face to her throat. I grew dizzier, as a dozen questions rushed into my brain. "Don't bother asking why or how or anything like that," said Samantha. "I can't tell you that. If that's going to be a problem, you should leave now. I'm letting you know this because I like you, and I want to take the next step, but this is non-negotiable." "Okay," I said, unsure of what was happening. "Not a problem. So what? You have a removable face. Who cares? It looks good." "There's something else. Once a day, usually in the evening, I have to remove the face and disinfect the inside of it. If I don't, it will rot. This takes about an hour, give or take, depending on how my day went. During this time, you must never ever look at my real face. Never. Do you understand?" "Why, yes. Got it. Don't ask about it, don't look at your real face." Samantha stood up. "Now, I'm going to go into the bathroom and clean my face. That will give you plenty of time to think about what I've told you. If you're here when I'm done." "That's great. I would like that. But if you're gone, I'll understand." She turned and walked into her bedroom. I sat in stunned silence as I heard the bathroom door close. I gave the thing some serious thought. It was possible that it was a joke of some kind. It was possible that it was a delusion. Was it possible that it was true? Well, it was certainly possible to transform an actor's face with movie makeup, so I supposed it was possible that Samantha wore a removable face every day. Maybe she had had a horrible accident where her flesh had been mangled. Maybe her face had been melted by acid, or burned by fire, or the skin shorn off by heavy machinery. If it had, I would never know, because she would never tell me, and I would never see it. I pictured a face of raw, naked muscle, rotting away. Could I kiss her, if that was what I was kissing? But wasn't that what we all were, under the skin? Just muscle and bone and blood and squishy organs. I paced around the living room, running my hand through my hair. I liked Samantha, a lot. She was smart, and funny. And beautiful. But was that beauty real? Did it count? Did it matter if it was real or not? Was I being superficial even worrying about it? When she came out of the bathroom, I was still there. I looked at her face. She smiled and I was in love. We dated, we moved in together, we decided to get married. For the most part, it was a completely normal relationship, typical of two young people in love, building a life together. During the day, it was easy to forget about the face altogether. It looked natural enough, and only in certain positions, in certain lights, was there ever any indication that it wasn't natural. But every night was the same. Samantha would close herself in the bathroom, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 2, and clean the inside of her face. The curiosity never left me. I would sit there and wonder what was under that face. I came so close to barging in on her a few times, but I never did. I did occasionally ask her about it. About what, if anything, had happened. About how it was possible to make the removable face look so real. About what it really looked like underneath. I tried to coax her into showing me, assuring her that I loved her no matter what, and didn't give a damn what her real face looked like. I was just curious, that's all. She never showed me, or told me the story behind it. She didn't get upset at me, unless I was really badgering her. She'd just shrug and say, "You know you can't see it. You know I can't tell you about it." I never told anybody about Samantha's removable face. It's not that she asked me not to. I just didn't think it was anybody's business. Except once, I did tell somebody. It was during my bachelor's party. We had rented several cabins in Big Sur and spent the night drinking and packing our noses with powders that we shouldn't have been packing our noses with. Everyone else had passed out and the sun was creeping up behind us as I stood on the majestic cliffs with my friend Chris, looking down on the Pacific waves crashing against the rocks. Chris was my best friend, as close to a brother as I'd known. We'd grown up together, and visited each other at college often, and spent the summers together. After college, we'd moved to different cities, but we stayed in close contact. Standing there on the cliffs, I told Chris about Samantha's removable face. At first, he thought I was joking. Then he had 1,000 questions, most of which I couldn't answer. What's underneath? I don't know, man. I don't know. Doesn't that drive you crazy, not knowing? I shrugged. Lots of stuff I don't know. Don't know how to do calculus, and I don't know what happens when we die. But dude, she's about to be your wife. And you don't even know what she looks like. I mean, I'd have to take a look. Like, you could set a camera up in the bathroom. That's where she does it, right? Set up a camera and have a look and then you'll know. I sighed. Yeah, it drives me crazy. I've asked her 1,000,000 times. But she told me I could never look. Gotta respect that, man, even if I don't like it. That's love. Chris laughed. You telling me to respect a woman? Up is down now. Then we fell back into talking about old times as a new day dawned. Chris was in town for business last week, and planned on spending the weekend at our house. The conversation at Big Sur had happened 4 years ago, and we hadn't spoken about Samantha's removable face since, despite keeping in close contact and seeing each other as often as two people transforming into adults in different parts of the country can. It happened on Saturday evening. We were lounging lazily in the backyard, deep into the beer, having just finished with some grilled steaks, when I got a text from work. God damn it, I groaned. I have to make a work call. Seriously? Said Samantha, raising an artificial eyebrow. On a Saturday night? My biggest client, baby. Sorry. It is what it is, I guess, said my wife. I'm going to head inside and get cleaned up. Chris? Are you okay just hanging out for a bit? Chris smiled. I'll be fine. Got my beer, got some weeds to pull in your garden. God knows your lazy ass husband isn't going to do it. Those tomatoes are choking to death. It's a tragedy. I rolled my eyes and went into the side yard to make my call. 15 minutes into it, I heard the screams coming from inside. Both my best friend and my wife were wailing in terror. I dropped the phone and ran into the house and down the hall to our bedroom. Through the open door, I could see that the door to the master bathroom was also standing open. Don't come in. Screamed Samantha. I don't have my face on. Call an ambulance. He looked. Oh God, he looked. She sounded desperate, and truly horrified. That made me desperate and horrified, and I wanted to rush into the bathroom, but I knew suddenly that that would be a mistake. I knew suddenly that Samantha didn't want me to look at her real face, not out of a sense of vanity, but for my own safety. Chris staggered backwards, out of the bathroom. He was holding a straightened out paperclip, which he had used to pick the privacy lock. Now he was stabbing it again and again into his eyes, shouting gibberish. He was clearly in the depths of madness, and it turned my stomach to see him mutilate himself. Call a fucking ambulance. My wife screamed. Don't come in here. He fucking looked. I turned and ran back to the side yard, where my phone was lying in the newly mowed grass. My client was still on the line, alarmed, asking what was happening, what all the screaming was. I hung up on him and called 911. When the paramedics arrived, Chris was having a seizure in the hallway. Samantha was stroking his head, sobbing. Her face was on, but it had been done hastily, and everything looked a little off. My world has been dark this past week. My best friend is in a psychiatric hospital under suicide watch. He's completely blind and mostly catatonic, except when he slips into a violent, babbling mania. The doctors are optimistic that his state is temporary, but they don't know the truth about what caused it, because I told the paramedics that Chris had taken a large dose of psychedelic mushrooms and fallen into psychosis. I saw no good reason to tell the truth about what had happened. Who would believe that one look at my wife's real face would make somebody insane? At best, we would be the subjects of a long investigation. At worst, we would have to prove that what we were saying was true, by showing somebody Samantha's face. Then the same thing would happen again, and what after that? I had no idea, and no interest in finding out. For Samantha's part, I knew that she would never consent to show anybody her real face, no matter what the consequences of refusal were. I did get a follow-up call from the police, asking me to confirm my story. The hospital found no traces of psilocybin in Chris's blood, though that's not unheard of, since it has a short half-life. If they end up testing his hair, I will likely be in a lot of trouble. But that's truly the least of my concerns. Samantha is in a state of her own. She still cleans the inside of her face, though not as regularly, and when she puts it back on, it's always crooked now. It is beginning to smell a little bit. I've tried to assure her that it wasn't her fault. He knew, I said. I told him that nobody was ever allowed to look at it. He knew, and then he broke into the bathroom. This is not on you, baby. Please. Talk to me. Not on me? That one look at my fucking face makes people insane? Please. I just need some time alone. As for me, I am doing my best to hold it together. Do you know what's strange, though? Despite what happened to Chris, I still find myself curious about what my wife's real face looks like. More curious than ever, really. Posted by /nslewis. 3 quick facts before I tell you the story of my fiancé's death. First, llamas, when sufficiently agitated, will spit. I don't mean like you're spitting a mouthful of toothpaste into the sink, or even hawking up a good loogie onto the sidewalk. No, this is a spray of green gastric juice summoned forth from the depths of one of the animal's several stomachs. It smells about as bad as anything you can imagine, and it's very hard to get that smell off of you. I got hit with this nasty shit once a few years ago, during my first visit to meet Marla's parents. They ran a llama farm. I got a little drunk and started goofing around with one of the llamas, and it got me, right in the face. I wasn't allowed in the house that night, because I smelled so bad, and had to sleep in a tent, alone. They burned the tent afterwards. I was very respectful to llamas after that. Next, a single bolt of lightning can contain up to 1 billion volts of electricity. By comparison, a defibrillator operates at closer to 1,000 volts. Finally, there is a local legend in the town where Marla grew up about a ghost called the Weeping Wisp. As it goes, in 1698, a man by the name of William Stevens was accused of murdering one of the 4 daughters of a wealthy businessman. Stevens was found guilty, chained to a tree in the woods, and left to starve to death. He survived for 26 days, drinking what rainwater he could, and insisting that he was innocent until his throat was so raw that he couldn't talk anymore. When he died, he was in such rough shape that not even the animals would eat him, and his corpse was left there as an object lesson to the townsfolk. The corpse rotted away, until it was a black, withered husk, and people said that it was weeping still, oozing whatever fluid still remained out of its eye sockets. Then, the corpse disappeared. After that, the businessman who had accused Stevens of murder began to lose his other 3 daughters. There was no obvious cause of death. The young women were simply found dead, one by one. In his suicide note, the businessman claimed to have witnessed his last remaining daughter's death. It was caused by the rotted corpse of William Stevens, he wrote. Stevens was, by then, just a blackened wisp, and still weeping. He had burst into the drawing room, placed his mouth over the young woman's lips, and hungrily sucked her soul out in front of her father. After describing all of this, the businessman confessed that the first daughter was never murdered at all. She had died by accident, falling off a horse. He had framed Stevens, who was a rising competitor and a threat to his business. Now, he knew, Stevens was coming for his righteous revenge. Ever since, young women around town have occasionally dropped dead for no apparent reason, and the weeping wisp has been glimpsed now and then, through a window at night, through the foliage on a hiking trail, etc. I don't know. I guess the guy figured that they already killed him for the crime of murder, so he might as well get some mileage out of the whole thing. Marla had always bought into the legend of the weeping wisp, and went so far as to drag me to the local library once, where we spent hours going through the microfiche archives. There was enough there that you could convince yourself that the story was true, if you didn't think about it too hard. As for me, I thought it was utter bullshit. When you're dead, you're dead. Or that's what I always believed, right up until a few months ago. Now, I don't think that's always true. It was the night before our wedding was to take place. We were going to have it at Marla's parents' farm, and were gathered together with some of the wedding party in their house, well into our cups. My best man, Jake, was quite hammered, and was standing up on the coffee table, making impromptu speeches, roasting me. Everyone was busting a gut laughing at my expense. "Easy buddy," I mumbled. "Don't want to be too hungover for tomorrow. Maybe you should call it a night." "I ever tell you guys about the time Dave pooped his pants?" Jake bellowed to the audience. This wasn't when he was 1 or 2. He was 22. "Oh, I never heard that one," said Marla, delighted. I groaned. Well, it was 2 in the morning, and Dave here was hankering for some Taco Bell. There was a thunderclap and rain started hammering down on the metal roof. "Shoot," said Marla's mom. "It found us." A big storm had been forecast, but it had been uncertain if its path would cross the llama farm. It was supposed to pass by morning either way, but now all the fields would be soaking wet and muddy, which was a major bummer in terms of our outdoor wedding plans. There was a flash of lightning, and another burst of thunder. "Oh no," said Marla. Floppy. Floppy, or more formally Mr. Floppy Ears, was Marla's favorite llama. She'd named him as a kid, and spent a lot of time with him growing up. "He hates thunder. I better go check up on him." "Baby," I said. "It's pouring out. Floppy will be fine." "No," said my fiancé. "If I don't go out there, he'll be up all night freaking out. I want him fresh for the wedding. He has to be there." I sighed. "All right. I'll come with you." "No. I'm the only one he lets near when he's scared." I sighed again. "All right, baby. Do what you gotta do." Marla got up, put on her raincoat, and left through the front door. "So anyway," said Jake, still standing on the coffee table, "we find somebody sober enough to drive us to Taco Bell, and our boy here just goes absolutely nuts. No self-control at all. Crunchwrap Supreme? Yep, he'll have one of those. Shredded chicken burrito? Why get one when you can have 3? Doritos Locos? How many you got?" The sounds of laughter were drowned out by the massive rumble of thunder, and the lights in the house cut out a moment later. Marla's father called the power company right away, and was told that they were getting a lot of activity that night, and were doing their best, but to expect a couple hours without power. "Shoot," said Marla's mom. "David, be a dear and get some candles from the kitchen. Bottom drawer by the oven. There should be some matches in there as well." "Of course," I said. Meanwhile, I can't wait to hear the conclusion of Jacob's story. I sighed in the darkness, then found my way into the kitchen with my phone's flashlight. I heard them all down the hall just absolutely cracking up at Jake's story. I fumbled around and found the candles and matches and brought them back to the living room. When I got there, Jake had finished his story and was gasping for air from laughing so hard. "Oh God," he said through the tears. Then he straightened up. "Uh-oh. I feel something brewing myself right now." He patted his stomach. "Oof. All I can say is I hope the toilet flushes with the power out. Be right back." Without waiting for objection, Jake left the living room and headed down the hall toward the bathroom. I was glad of that. I loved the guy, but he was really laying it on thick that night. I jumped at the chance to change the subject, and got Marla's mom to start talking about llamas, as I knew that once she started, there would be no stopping her, and it would take the focus off me. It turned out to be a mistake, because, in the spirit of the night, she went right for the story about the llama spitting on me. However, after everyone had a good cackle over that one, she did end up getting into her groove, and I knew that she'd have the floor for a while. Before long, an intense day of drinking and socializing caught up to me, and I nodded off on the couch. I was awakened some time later by a loud clap of thunder. My head was pounding and I was more than ready for bed, especially knowing what a big day I had ahead of me. I checked the time on my phone. It was after midnight. I looked around in the flickering candlelight for my fiancée, but she wasn't there. Marla hasn't come back yet? How long does it take to calm a llama down? "Oh, she'll be a while, dear," said Marla's mom. "I'm gonna go get her," I said, standing up on wobbly legs. I walked over to the large bay window and looked out into the night. "Does anybody have a raincoat I can borrow?" The night lit up in a flash and I saw it out there, a few feet from the house. Judging by the screams from behind me, I wasn't the only one. There was something crawling on its belly through the grass. It was mostly the silhouette I saw against the lightning, since its body, and particularly its face, was as black as the night itself. I saw the outline of thin wispy hairs sticking out of its head. "Did you see it? Did you see it?" cried Marla's mom. "It's the weeping wisp. God help us." I am a rational person, but I'm also not one to deny what's right in front of my eyes. Suddenly, I was very much awake, and as frightened as I had ever been in my life. "Marla," I thought. "I have to find Marla." The thought of going outside where that thing was crawling was terrifying, so I didn't let myself think about it. I just focused on moving, towards the door. Just one foot in front of the other. But when I was halfway there, I heard that door open, and froze in my tracks. I couldn't see what was standing there, as the candlelight didn't reach that far, but I sure could smell it. It was the smell of death. It was the smell of the weeping wisp, oozing gore from its eye sockets, come to feed its insatiable hunger. Behind me, I heard the sounds of panic. Furniture was knocked around as people scrambled over each other. I turned and ran as fast as I could, towards the back door, struggling through the mass of bodies that were trying desperately to escape the weeping wisp. I wanted to help them, but more than anything, I needed to find Marla. Maybe it was too late. Maybe the weeping wisp had already got her, and was coming back for the bridesmaids. I made it outside and rushed through the rain, crazed with fear, calling out my fiancé's name. I reached the barn and saw that the door was standing open. I searched all around, but found no trace of Marla. Had the weeping wisp sucked her entire body up? That wasn't how the legend went, but maybe the legend had gotten it wrong. I hunched over and vomited, then stood up and slapped myself in the face. She's out there, somewhere, I told myself. Maybe she got away from it. I stumbled back outside and began looking around wildly, desperately. Uselessly. Even with my phone's flashlight, I couldn't see very much on account of the driving rain. Marla! I screamed. Marla! I tried to think rationally and optimistically. She must have run back to the house. So that's where I headed, back across the yard, back towards the house. Back to the weeping wisp. I could see the glow of candlelight inside through the bay window when I tripped over something. My phone went flying from my grasp, and I fell face first into the mud. I scrambled in a blind panic, reaching out with my hand, trying to find my phone. It must have landed with the flashlight down to the ground. Just as I was about to give up on the phone and run on through the dark, I felt it. It was soft on the surface, but as I pressed down, there was hardness underneath. I explored the object for a few moments before I realized what it was. It was a hand. Marla? I whispered. Marla? I tried a little louder. I crawled over and began feeling the body in the darkness. It was a body I knew well. It was Marla. Here's what happened, as cobbled together from different accounts. That night, when Jake said that he was going to the bathroom, he went instead to the barn where Marla was comforting Mr. Floppy Ears. Unbeknownst to me, Jake and Marla had slept together in college a few times. Marla and I had been casually seeing each other at the time, but it wasn't that serious yet. And to Marla, Jake was never a serious possibility. But he felt differently. He fell in love with her. He claims that he got over it, and for the most part he had. But on that night, the night before Marla was to get married, with liquor coursing through him, Jake made the sudden decision to give it one last shot. There in the barn, Jake professed his love to Marla. She told him to get his shit together and sleep it off. He grabbed her and tried to kiss her. She kneed him in the groin and told him that if he left right then, she would forget it ever happened. He tried to grab her again, and she turned to run back to the house. But he caught up to her. Jake choked Marla on the grass outside the barn until she stopped struggling. When that happened, the realization of what he had just done came down like gravity on his head. He tried to get her up. But she wasn't breathing. He couldn't feel a pulse. Meanwhile, Mr. Floppy Ears was going wild in his pen. He managed to break out of it, and rushed at the man who had attacked his friend, spitting on Jake's face. Already out of his mind with panic, Jake started running. He tried to form a plan, as the rancid smell of llama spit circled around his brain, dancing with the horror of what he had just done. If he ran into the woods, and away from the party, it would be obvious that it had been him who killed Marla. People were already probably noticing his absence. He decided to run back to the house, try to sneak into the bathroom, and pretend that he had passed out on the floor after puking on himself. He'd still probably be found out in the end, but at least he'd have a chance. Meanwhile, as Jake was running back to the house, a bolt of lightning struck Marla squarely in her chest, jolting her heart back into action. She shot awake with a gasp, but found that her legs were too unsteady to support her weight. Her body was on fire with pain, and she dragged herself desperately through the muddy grass towards the house for help. That's when I saw her out the window. Her face had been scorched by the lightning, and she was covered in mud. Meanwhile, Jake had reached the house himself, and had been pacing around the front door. Finally, he got up the courage to go inside and follow through with his plan. He opened the door, and that's when the repugnant odor of llama spit wafted in and reached the living room. Marla collapsed from the effort before she made it back to the house. Later, when I tripped over her body on my way to look for her, she was still alive, but not by much. The doctors said that it was a miracle that Marla was still alive, but also insisted that she probably didn't die in a technical sense that night. Once the heart stops, no amount of electricity can make it start again. Marla disagrees. After hearing what she has to say, I believe her. Of all that happened, this is the worst part. Marla died. She saw, firsthand, what happens when we die. The horror of getting choked to death, she says, pales in comparison to the horror of what she experienced after she died. It's a pit, she said. That's all it is. It's an endless pit full of dead people. We're piled on top of each other. I dropped right on top of it all. Not a second later, somebody fell on top of me. 2 people die every second in this world, and that's where they all end up, good or bad. On top of the pile, for a moment. Then they start to get buried by the bodies of other dead people. I shivered, but offered a rationalization. Maybe it was just all in your head, you know? Like a dream caused by oxygen deprivation. A nightmare. It wasn't a hallucination. I was there. I couldn't move, but I could feel my body, pressed up against the others. I could see around me, but not for long, as another body fell from above onto my head. I could smell, and wanted to throw up, but I couldn't. I just wanted to get out of there, but I knew that I couldn't. Ever. Because on the way down, I saw how many bodies were there. Billions and billions and billions. You go there, and you stay there, forever, and you're aware of your situation, but can't do a thing about it. I took a deep breath and looked down at Marla, lying scorched on the hospital bed. The look in her eyes left me with no doubt that what she was saying was true. Maybe you do get to leave eventually. Maybe that's just, like, purgatory, where they dump your body while they decide where your soul goes. Yeah, said Marla. Maybe. But I could tell that she was humoring me. A heavy fog came over my mind and I needed a smoke. I'll be back in a minute, okay baby? Okay. I walked out of the hospital and across the parking lot to my car, where I had a pack of Camel filters. I reached in, pulled out a cigarette, and put it between my lips. My hands were shaking. I could picture the pit of dead bodies clearly in my mind. I could picture myself dropping down on top of it all. I could picture myself 100 years later, wedged in the middle of the pile now. Never able to do anything but think about how miserable I was. If I hadn't lost my mind. I hoped that there was at least that mercy. That maybe after a while you just stopped thinking and your mind was totally blank. I looked down at my lighter, which I had pulled out of my pocket without even realizing it. It was automatic. You sure you want to smoke that, buddy? I asked myself. I snapped the cigarette in half and walked back across the parking lot, in order to spend time with the woman I loved while I still could. Posted by nosleep. I bought a new personality from a witch. Now I just want my old one back. The witch scratched her long pointy nose and let out a croaky sigh that sounded like several animals dying. Then she spoke in a 1,000-year-old voice. Child. Do you know the fable of the farmer and the cow? No, I said, bouncing my knee nervously. I just wanted to get this over with. It goes as follows. Once there was a farmer who grew so lonely that he fucked his cow. My knee bounced higher as I waited for her to go on. She didn't. And nothing, child. Every day that man had to look at himself in the mirror with the understanding that he was a cow fucker. Once you fuck something, you cannot go back and unfuck it. Do you understand? I was starting to worry that my knee was going to fly off my body and hit the ceiling. Yes, I said, pushing my Coke bottle glasses up against my unibrow. They were always slipping down my nose. I was naturally oily, plus Brett Hughley had snapped them in half one day after gym class, and they were held together with packing tape and didn't quite fit right anymore. Be careful what you wish for. That sort of thing, right? Nothing, I figured, could be worse than my current existence as a hopelessly awkward and endlessly punchable nerd. On the social pecking order, I was lower even than a cow fucker, bullied by the boys on a daily basis and mocked ruthlessly by all of the pretty, popular girls. Even the other nerds were afraid to be seen with me, so I didn't have a single real-life friend. It really sucked, and I was desperate to change my situation at any cost. I want to do it, I said. Please. The witch suddenly shot a scarred, gnarled hand across the table and grabbed my wrist. It startled me so much that my leg stopped bouncing and grew warm and wet with the contents of my bladder. She yanked my arm onto the table and, with her other hand, raked 4 claws across my flesh. I yowled in pain and began sobbing. Still holding my wrist with one hand, the witch reached her other one, which was now dripping with my blood, into a jar and pulled out a wriggling toad. She brought it up to her mouth, bit off its head, and spat the head out, like a man preparing a cigar for an afternoon smoke. Then she jammed the headless toad into my open wounds, neck first, and rubbed it around. The witch hissed out an incantation in Latin. Being a nerd, I understood it perfectly. She said, "Dark One, hear my plea. Turn this pathetic loser into a ruthless winner." Then she released me and sighed again. It is done, child. My heart breaks for you. But remember, no refunds. The next morning I got up early and looked at my face in the mirror. Jesus Christ, what a fucking mess, I muttered. I shaved my unibrow. I squeezed every blackhead, then dug through my mother's stuff and exfoliated my face. I used some whitening strips on my teeth. I found my contact lenses in the closet. They hurt like hell, which is why I didn't wear them ever, but suddenly the pain seemed worth it. Gotta stop being a pussy, I told myself. When I was done, I had another look in the mirror. Not great, I said. But better. I decided to walk to school that day, even though it was 3 miles away. The school bus was for losers. I hustled so that I arrived a few minutes before the morning bell rang. I didn't give a shit about being late anymore, the thought used to terrify me, I just wanted people to see the new me. Brett Hughley was the first to see me coming down the hall. He burst out laughing. Aw. Whittle Dinkleton got himself all cleaned up. That was his name for me. Whittle Dinkleton. His girlfriend, Sarah Pendergast, started snickering. Aw. He's so adorable. I stopped walking, a few paces from Brett. Had to get cleaned up, Brett, I said, smiling. Your mom asked me to. Gonna fuck her in the back of your Jeep after first period. A hush fell upon the hallway. Brett's face grew redder than a cooked lobster, and veins protruded from his neck as he clenched his fists. Somebody coughed. That's right, Brett, I said. Gonna give you a new baby brother or sister. Guess that kind of makes me your dad now, huh? I had been pummeled by Brett dozens of times, and had never looked forward to it, but something about this time was different. A lot about it was different. For one, I wasn't afraid. I felt that I'd rather not get hit, but if I did, then I did. And the other thing was that I had never seen Brett so incredibly enraged before. It was a beautiful thing that I had done. I bit my lip as Brett threw his backpack to the ground. He pointed a meaty finger at me. You're done, Dinkleton, he said, and he charged. Without fear blotting out my mind, I realized that Brett was not a very imaginative guy. I ducked in anticipation of a wide right hook, and that's exactly what he delivered. Where usually it connected with my head, Brett's fist now slammed into the locker to his left. There was a terrible crunch. Fuck, Brett hissed. I was in a perfect position to swing my elbow into his stomach. I'd never struck another living thing, but now I did so, gloriously. Oof. Brett doubled over, and I had had so much fun the first time I elbowed him that I brought another one to bear on the back of his head. He dropped to the floor, chin first. I'm a kiwi, he groaned through a bloodied mouth. But he didn't get up. What's that, Brett? I asked. You're going to kiss me? No, thanks. I'm saving myself for your mom. Then I turned around and walked away, feeling the stunned gaze of 30 students at my back. At lunch, I eschewed my regular light salad and skim milk for a burger and fries with Coke. I sat, as usual, alone at my table in the corner. I felt that was the smart move. Let them come to me. Play it cool. And it worked. A few minutes in, none other than Sarah Pendergast herself came and stood across the table from me. Sarah was the most popular, and, without a doubt, the prettiest sophomore in school. Hey, she said. Can I sit here? I nodded. She set her tray down and leaned over the table. Can I tell you a secret? Sure, I said. I think Brett's an asshole. I took a gulp of Coke and set the can down. Can't argue with you there. Do you want to know something else? You can tell me anything you see fit, I said. Whatever's on your mind. Well, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I joined in with all the teasing and stuff. That's not who I am. I just, somebody's doing something and you go along with it. They've done, psychological experiments proving that that's how people act. So I wanted to apologize. It's fine, I said, smiling. I didn't even notice, really. And I'd like to make it up to you. What do you think? This was 100% outside of the range of anything that had ever happened to me, but I pretended I knew what I was doing. Sure. Let's take a walk. Down to the football field. All right. We stood up and walked across the cafeteria together, knowing that half the people there had their eyes on us. I chanced a glance over at Brett's table. They were all looking very sullen. Brett himself was staring at his tray of food, poking around at it with a fork. His lip was swollen and he did not look happy at all. Then we were outside, walking to the football field. We didn't say anything. I felt butterflies in my stomach, but that was nothing compared to what I would have been like before my visit to the witch. I would never have been walking side by side with Sarah Pendergast, but if I had somehow found myself in that position, I'd probably have needed direct medical attention. Then we were under the bleachers. She reached over and kissed me. It was my first kiss and made me light up with pleasure and desire. Before very long, I was getting something that I had never actually thought I would ever get, my first blowjob. It was the best thing that had ever happened in my life. When she was done, she stood up and smiled. "There's a get-together at Aaron's tonight," she said. "We can go all the way if you want. Just bring a condom." I had no idea where Aaron's house was, but I wasn't about to ask for directions. I'd figure it out. "Sure," I said, playing it cool and feeling happier than I'd ever been. Aaron's parents were loaded, and it was easy to find their address if you knew where to look. And, having had absolutely no social life, and living primarily through the internet, I knew where to look. My own parents both worked early in the morning, and went to bed around 9. I waited until they were asleep, then slipped the keys to my mom's Kia off the hook. I'd never driven before in my life, so decided to take the less expensive car in case I got in an accident, though, frankly, they were both pretty shitty. I somehow managed to make it there, to the ritzy part of town where Aaron lived. I stopped off for a box of condoms on the way there, giddy with excitement. I parked a few blocks away, so that nobody would see the rust bucket I'd arrived in. I'd never been to a party before, and, in my imagination, I thought there'd be cars jamming the driveway, and music and lights and partygoers spilling out into the front lawn. But that wasn't the case at all. The few cars that were there were neatly parallel parked along the sidewalk, and the facade of the house couldn't have been quieter. Must be a pretty exclusive party, I thought as I rang the bell. Karen White answered the door. "We didn't know if you'd come," she said. "We're so happy that you did." "Yeah," I said, stepping in. "Me too. Follow me into the living room." I did, and when I got there, the scene was not at all what I expected. 5 or 6 of the most popular kids from school were sitting in various places, sipping on wine, chatting. That was a little more subdued than I had imagined, but it wasn't what was strange. What was strange was that there were a dozen or so adults, also lounging around and swirling red liquid around in their glasses while they held discourse. 2 of them, who I supposed to be husband and wife, seemed distraught, and were staring off into empty space. I didn't get a chance to make sense of it all before Sarah Pendergast leapt up from a couch and ran over to me. "You came," she squealed, wrapping me in a hug. Then, whispered in my ear, "And you're going to come again tonight." I felt dizzy and disoriented. I had known that I would need to learn the ropes of social interactions a bit, but this was all a little much. "Just in time," said Aaron, getting up from his chair and pouring a glass of wine from a bottle at the liquor cabinet. "It's him?" said the male portion of the distraught couple. "This is the boy who has displaced my son?" "Shut up, Stuart," said a lady from the other side of the room. "Maybe if you'd learned to shut up more, you wouldn't have to see this." "Oh, so it's my fault?" this sad Stuart guy moaned, leaning forward. As if. He was silenced when his wife put her hand on his shoulder. I'm sure what Stuart means to say is that this alleged hothead of Brett's is also responsible for 2 state championships. Will anyone deny it? For our part, we won't deny that Brett's temper has caused its fair share of troubles. The question is, does the bad outweigh the considerable good? Rather, that's the first question. The greater question is, what has he ever done? She spat that he out like somebody had put a dog turd in her mouth, and she pointed at me when she said it. "He beat the shit out of your loser son," said Sarah Pendergast. "That's what he did." The room fell silent. I had no idea what was going on, other than that I didn't like it at all. I could be at home playing D&D online, I thought. I could be at home jerking off. I could be at home doing literally anything other than what's happening right now, whatever that is. Aaron handed me the glass of wine. "Well?" he said. "Tell us what you think about Brett." My mind shut off, and my mouth opened. Brett? There's nothing to him. It's a pretty basic case of what Freud termed penis envy. The room erupted in laughter. Everybody except for Brett's parents joined in the mirth. They both hung their hands even lower than before. The man began sobbing, and the woman wiggled away from him on the couch a little bit, and then also began sobbing. "Is there any doubt then?" asked a gray-haired man in a very expensive-looking suit. "Bring him in." A door swung open and I saw the backside of a butler, wheeling a gurney in. Brett was strapped to that gurney, with a ball gag stuffed in his mouth, and was struggling desperately and futilely against his restraints. "All yours, boss," said Aaron, now handing me a gleaming knife. "Go right for the heart if you can. Makes it better for everybody." They wanted me to kill Brett, I realized. Fuck. No. No way. Absolutely not. "I'm going to fuck you so hard tonight," Sarah Pendergast whispered in my ear. These people are insane, I thought. God, I have to get out of here. I turned the knife over in my hand as the butler brought Brett directly in front of me. He was staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes that said so much. They said, "I'm sorry. Please don't do this. I'm just a scared child." If I could take it all back, I would. But I know I can't, because you can't unfuck a cow. But I am begging you. Don't kill me. My heart was slamming away in my chest in jagged beats, struggling to keep up. Just get it over with already, said Brett's mom. The same mom I had joked about fucking earlier that day. There's no way out, I realized with horror, as I looked around the room at the cruel, eager faces. If I don't do it, then it's me on that hospital bed. I lifted the knife up high with a trembling hand and brought it home.